So welcome back to Family Bible Time. Last week we did Jesus appearing to the disciples, so the quiz is going to be on Jesus appearing to the disciples. Question number 1. Where were the disciples? The answer is in a locked room. Question number 2 is, what were Jesus' first words when he entered the room? Peace be with you. Question number 3. Which disciple wasn't there the first time? Thomas. Question number 4. What proof did Thomas want? He wanted to see the holes in his hands, the holes in his feet, and his pierced side. Question number 5 is, what did Jesus say to Thomas? Jesus said, Thomas, you have believed because you have seen. Blessed are those who have believed and have not seen. It's now time for our story. Our story this week is The Road to Emmaus, and it's taken from Luke chapter 24, 13 to 35. I've written it in my own words, so pay attention. Later that day, after the women had visited the tomb, there were 2 men walking along the road. They were going from Jerusalem to Emmaus. It was about 7 miles long. They encountered a stranger who they did not recognize. This person was Jesus. Jesus asked them, "What are you two talking about?" These 2 men were talking about the events that had happened over the last couple of days. Jesus dying on a cross. Jesus was confused by this and Jesus acted confused as though he didn't know that it had happened. These 2 men were very confused and said, "You must be the only one in Jerusalem who does not know what has happened." These 2 men were also very sad because they were followers of Jesus. And Jesus ended up going on and asking again, "What do you mean? Why don't I know?" And they started talking about how Jesus was this amazing prophet who did miracles and great things. And they said, these 2 women came back from the tomb this morning and said they found it empty, and none of us believed them. Now, Jesus started explaining to them why he had to die, yet they still did not recognize him. Jesus used the Old Testament scriptures to explain why he had to die. And he went through all of Genesis, through to the prophets, and to the end of the Old Testament, and explained to them why he had to die. Now, they got to Emmaus later that day, and they sat down, and Jesus pretended he had to keep on going. They invited Jesus to come and sit with them and have food with them. Jesus ended up breaking the bread, and at this moment he disappeared, and the men recognized who he was. And that's our story for this week. So, what could this mean for us today? Firstly, we don't really know how Jesus disguised himself, or why they didn't recognize who Jesus was. So I'm not going to think about that and talk about that today. I'm going to talk about the fact that Jesus used the Old Testament to explain to them why he had to die. And it doesn't necessarily mean that these men didn't know about the Old Testament and didn't know about the prophets and what the Jews would have called the Torah back then. But they may have had misunderstandings of who the Messiah was supposed to be, who the Son of God was supposed to be. However, they didn't think Jesus was the Messiah or Son of God. They thought he was the prophet. But Jesus was the Son of God and explained to them why he had to die using the Old Testament. So for us to understand exactly what Jesus did on the cross and rising again and ascending on high, for us to understand that fully and why it needed to happen, we also must be reading the Old Testament and the New Testament, and not just reading one or the other, so that we can fully understand everything. So, our discussion this week again uses the same first three questions and has a fourth different question. Question number 1. I wonder what your favourite part of the story was. Question number 2. I wonder what your least favourite part of the story was. Question number 3. What could we take out of the story and still have the whole of the story? And question number 4. I wonder if you would have recognised who Jesus was. It's now time for our prayer activity this week. This week, I'd like to encourage you to pray in different positions. Now, I have 4 positions I'd like you to try. First one is standing up. Second one is sitting down. Third one is kneeling down. Fourth one is lying down. But the key thing to remember about prayer is there's the chatting and the catching. So we chat to God and we catch what God's communicating to us. So if you can do that together as a family or as an individual, that's great. That's everything for Family Bible Time this week. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and I hope to see you next week.